I welcome you all to episode 6 of season 2 of the Common Ground webinar series. This is being brought to you by the PMI South Asia Region 11 group, and this is possibly the 5th month that we are doing this. And once again, we have lined up a terrific session. And I'd like to invite you all to this session, and I hope you enjoy it. When we were doing the preparation for it, I was excited to learn more about it. Alina Wheeler, the author, has said that design is intelligence made visible. And we all use the word design so very often in our day-to-day language, whether it's in IT architecture or designing an interior space of our houses, or even as Steve Jobs rightly introduced the concept of designing a phone. But a word that is so ubiquitous, we don't pause to think what design actually means and how design is relevant and important in not just IT architecture or architecture, but in every aspect of our life. On that note, I would like to invite today's speaker, Padma Parthasarathi. She's a Senior Vice President of Consulting and Digital Services at Tech Mahindra and has had a long career with them since 2006, playing multiple roles in the company. She currently heads the global consulting team at Tech Mahindra, engaging in business consulting and technology and business advisory for customers. Padma has been featured on the Forbes India's Women Power list of self-made women for 2020, a very high honor, and is also the leader and sponsor of Tech Mahindra's internal digital transformation programs. While she enjoys reading, yoga, and traveling, she's extremely passionate about two topics. One is about how is design relevant to all of us, and is other about sustainability. And today she's here to talk to us about the rise of design. Padma, thanks so much for taking the time out and joining us today on a Saturday evening. Looking forward to your session. To all our attendees, as usual, please start typing in your question and answers in the Q&A box. As usual, we will have enough time towards the end of the session to discuss and get some of our questions clarified with Padma. Padma, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kaushik, and thank you, PMI, Srini, Jacob, Roger, for this session, and I look forward to interacting with everyone. So I'm going to just be bringing up my presentation. So just to clarify, I'm not an expert in design by any means. It's just a subject that I like to read about, and I'll tell you how I started on that. I like to read and I like to tell stories. So I'm hoping to be able to share some of the stories that I have from my own experience and from what Tech Mahindra has experienced in the design space. And I hope it's useful and we can all learn from some of these that we have gone. So all of us, as I think Kaushik was saying, our expectations from design in today's world are very high. Kaushik touched upon Apple and Steve Jobs, and I think when the iPhone was introduced in 2007, it was the first one that had a touch screen. And within months, we got used to the idea of a touch screen, and we expect it now from all our devices, not just phones. So that's really how design can become so ubiquitous so quickly, and also set expectations for the future so high. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own journey with design and how I got introduced to this. So in the early 90s, I actually was in the US working for a company called Bantam Doubleday Dell, and I came across this book called The Design of Everyday Things. It's actually considered one of the Bibles of design. I didn't know it at that time. I just saw it as an interesting book to read. And as you can see from the cover, it shows you a teapot with the spout and the handle on the same side. And you realize you can't really use it to pour because you'd either get hot water all over yourself or the lid would fall off, etc. Right? So this book talks about how good design is done, how design has to be intuitive. So for instance, when you see a door and you don't know whether to push or pull a glass door, a bar across the middle indicates that you should pull, a bar across the middle indicates you should push, a handle indicates that you should pull. So these are the kinds of intuitive things that you build into everyday products. This really got me quite interested. Now, the second aspect, I come from a science and technology background. I'm certainly not a creative person by any means. But I was always interested in the creative world, and design seems to include a lot of aesthetics and creative aspects. So this was a book that I then found also around the same time, called Imagination Engineering. And this book really taught me, I mean, I don't think I've been short on imagination. Probably all the books I read give me that. But this taught me how to kind of channel imagination to make it into a creative tool for business. And again, so if you haven't read these books, do pick them up. They are very, very interesting books, both of them. I obviously read them in the 90s, so I'm sure there are multiple new versions that have come out of these books. But so this is really what I'm starting with. And I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to start with a story. And this is the story from the time Tech Mahindra acquired Satyam. And this was 2009. I'd just gone into Hyderabad. I was managing the post-acquisition activities between Tech Mahindra and Satyam. And Satyam had this very, very strong engineering team. And the engineering team was doing some great work in the digital IoT and those spaces. And this team conceptualized something quite interesting. This was for Pepsi. I mean, we have talked about it in the past, so I can mention that. And this was actually a concept for Gatorade, and it was a Gatorade dispenser, where we said we would, since Gatorade is meant to be a drink for sports persons, and it's meant to actually make good the losses that you have when you've gone through sweating and training, etc. It's going to make good the salts that you lose through that. So this is the concept, and we designed a dispenser which could analyze the sweat of an athlete, determine which salts were out of balance, and then create a custom-made drink for the athlete to make up those lost salts. So fantastic concept. It went up, to very senior levels in Pepsi. They all loved the concept. They launched it in some, test markets, and then the whole concept died. We didn't know what happened to it. We didn't hear about it. And what we didn't realize at the time was that this was a tech-led solution. We had thought through this solution by conceptualizing how IoT could be used in the Gatorade concept. But we did not really go out and talk to consumers of Gatorade to understand what they had. Now, 5 years ago, Gatorade actually has something called the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. They worked with another company called Smart Design, and they relaunched the concept, but very, very differently. So while the basic concept is the same of understanding what salts an athlete has lost and then trying to make those up, this product actually is slightly differently designed. What it has is it has this patch that you can put on your skin. The patch it changes color based on the salts that have got depleted. You read the patch using a mobile phone, and then the mobile app tells you what pod of Gatorade you should use. So they have this concept of pods, which contain the nutrients from Gatorade. You add it to a special water bottle that they've given you, and then I think about 300 ml of water is added to each pod, and you get a custom-made drink. Now, if you think about it, these are probably things that they got as issues with the original design. The original design expected the athlete to wear a sweatband, to take off the sweatband and put it into the machine, to have it analyzed by the machine, and then this customized drink created. And so one is you had to have the sweatband that was recommended, you had to be near the machine, you had to part with some personal thing of yours, which was the sweatband, which probably contained things like your DNA, etc. on it. And you put it into the machine, and then the machine makes the drink for you. Now, switch to this model that they have now done. So this is the concept that we had come up with earlier. The new model is completely under the control of the consumer, right? They decide when that sweatband should be taken off. It's not sent to anybody. It's analyzed by the app. It's very much under their control. They have the pod with them. They don't have to go to a dispenser to have that analyzed, etc. So this design is very, very different, right? It's not a technology-led design. It's probably a design that is obtained from consumers and their needs. And that really is what led Tech Mahindra. Now, Tech Mahindra was, we had done the original solution. We had no idea why it didn't go forward. But as we got familiar with this whole world of design, we realized that the world was moving from what we were calling connected world, connected solutions to this new tagline that we now use, which is connected world, connected experiences. And this is, in order for us to actually work in this world of connected world, connected experiences, we started looking at what should be the capabilities that Tech Mahindra needs. And this is when we went out and acquired a number of firms. Pininfarina, which is in the physical design space, they're best known for the design of the Ferrari car, which is what they used to do for a living before. But then they're also involved in design for a number of other things, right from designing a pen that can write in outer space to things like, townships, the airport at Istanbul, various products, retail spaces, all of those things are now designed by Pininfarina. More and more, they are incorporating digital into their design. The second acquisition that we made is a company called the Bio Agency, which is a design agency, a digital design agency that's based in the UK. And then last year, we made these two acquisitions of MadPow and Born. MadPow is again a design agency. Born takes design into technology implementation. So they do this great marriage of design plus technology. So these are the things that we have put together. Now, let me tell you why this is important and how that has helped us in terms of addressing needs of our clients in the market. So even this was around in 2016 when we were looking at acquiring the Bio Agency. That was a time when British Airways had just appointed Tech Mahindra as a technology vendor to them. And British Airways invited all the technology vendors to come in to design the new kind of British Airways app. This was a challenge that was thrown by the CEO to the CIO saying, can your technology vendors understand our customers and design the next generation app for us? And so all of them were asked to participate in this design contest and in a span of about 10 days come up with their ideas for the next gen app. Now, Tech Mahindra was the new kid on the block. We were almost as an afterthought, we were invited to this, and we worked with Bio Agency to come up with our concept for this hackathon. And what we did differently, and today, of course, every organization does it, and I think design thinking, etc., is very much a part of what an IT services firm like us would do. But in 2016, this was new. And what Bio did with us was to go out and talk to customers, find out what the pain points that passengers had were, and try and design the app to address those pain points. So some of the first few things that we figured out when we talked to customers was, and I think all of us experienced this, whenever we travel, we are usually under the weight limit on our baggage. So one time when we are over the baggage limit, we get slapped this huge charge, right, by the airline. And all of us feel very frustrated and angry about this charge. So what, was when we talked to customers, realized this was a pain point, we then said, how do you address that? And we told British Airways, what you probably need to do is to have something called a baggage credit. So this allows passengers to have a credit each time they're within the baggage limit and to use that credit for the one time that they are over the baggage limit when they have to carry something extra. So this is one of them. And then we gave a lot of other things, for instance, telling customers when the flight is likely to be late, even before they leave their house. That gives them time to plan their journeys. Allowing them things like upgrades at the gate, etc. Now, this then brings us to some very, very interesting concepts. When we do things like design thinking, you're told to identify customer personas. So let me give you an example of what we mean in this. So typically when you're looking at understanding customers in the past, probably a couple of decades ago, we went with what were called market segments, right? You understood which segment of customer you were targeting. Is it a middle class customer or is it a poorer class customer, etc. Those are the kinds of things. Which town are they in? Which geography are they in? Those are all things that one looked at. Then we came up with this concept of personas, and we said, what is the persona of that customer? So is this, a young, just starting to earn male? is it a single mother, or are you talking about somebody who's post-retirement? So we started defining personas and saying those would start defining perhaps the characteristics further. Then we went into the next part, which was the persona and the scenario. So if I take a young unmarried man who's just starting to work, and probably put them in a scenario which is travel. So what do you do to cater to that person's needs, right? So that's sort of capturing the reactions. But what actually we realized, and this is what we applied to the British Airways example, is that it's not just the persona and the scenario. So you could have something like frequent traveler, and the scenario is flights delayed. Now, I'm a frequent traveler and my flight is delayed. I might behave very differently from Kaushik if his flight is delayed and he's a frequent traveler. Maybe I will get all agitated and say, oh, I'm going to miss my meetings, and how am I going to make up for this time, etc. And I might do that. Where Kaushik might say, oh, this is a good time for me to catch up on my reading, and he might be very relaxed while I might be all hyper about it. So understanding the characteristics of the individual are also important for us to also determine how they're going to behave. And usually organizations want to drive the behavior. So in order to drive the behavior, you have to understand the persona and the characteristics and create the scenario for the person. So for instance, if they know that I am a last minute planner who likes to do everything last minute, maybe I will respond to an offer they give me of upgrading my seat to business class at the gate. Whereas somebody else who's a very, very organized person who likes everything decided up front may not respond to that kind of offer. So depending on what they know of me and my characteristics, they can actually create or actually drive certain behavior from me. So those are all the things that are so important in digital design. And the great thing about digital is it gives you a lot of this information, on a real-time basis in order for you to do that. I can see some questions coming up. We will address those as we go forward. So we spoke about this, the fact that they're driving design through or driving behavior through the concept of design. And most organizations now do things like this. But we've talked only about the experience. Now, if we had to go, there is more than digital experience or more than the front end to make digital work. And this is something that we've done with Scotiabank. Okay? Now, Scotiabank's mortgage business was looking at how to create a better experience for their customers. Now, typically, when a bank is giving you a mortgage, they're looking at the processes from their side, right? Here are all the forms that you need to fill. These are all the things that you need, all the documents that you need to get. This is the credit scoring, etc., that you need to have in place before we can even consider for you a loan. Typically, that's the experience all of us have had, right? You never know how long it's going to take. You never know how many more steps there are. You wonder why they can't accept digital documents, and you wonder why so many copies of all these things are required. So the whole thing is a very frustrating, not very interesting process. So again, what we did, and this was again done by the bioagency, what we did was we said, what is it that a homeowner, a person who wants to take a mortgage is looking for? So typically you either are a first-time homeowner or a person who's selling one house and buying another. Characteristics are slightly different, the needs are slightly different. But for either of these people, understanding where they are in the process, giving them that visibility is important. Figuring out what else. I mean, today, for instance, if I'm applying for a loan, I don't know whether I need 50 lakhs or I need 75 lakhs. Right? It depends on where I want to buy a home, what kind, etc. So what we started saying is it's not enough to just provide the loan. Let's look at everything around that life cycle. If a person is looking for a loan, they probably need information about what is their budget based on their income. What are the likely places that they can look at, and what are the likely homes they will get in that budget, right? And finally, what is the process that they will need to make this happen? Where are they today, and what else is left? Can they upload the documents online? If they have to get somebody like a lawyer to look at the documents, can that also be enabled through the same app instead of they having to go separately and take printouts of all these things and give it to those people? So the whole thing was looking at it holistically rather than just I am providing a loan to the customer. This is I am helping the customer own a home, and therefore everything that needs to be tied around it to make that happen. Now, therefore, this was not, one of course is to change this experience and add all of this to the experience. But then the other part, if I have to enable a loan to happen within 30 minutes, which is what the bank wanted to do, they said up to 2 million I want to offer within 30 minutes. If I have to make that happen, then I have to make sure that all of the back-end processes, that is all the operations staff know exactly what needs to be done with this to make it happen in that time. Similarly, all of the technology and interfaces that need to happen between this system and others in order to make that happen have to be in place. So that is really where the service design becomes so important. It's not just the interface and the experience, but everything around it in the organization that has to make this design work. So that's where we learned that this whole orchestration of process and technology is also a critical part of making design work. I talked about Pininfarina and how they are in this physical product design space. I also said that they are now getting into the digital space in the sense that they are combining physical and digital. So one of the things that Pininfarina worked a couple of years ago was on this self kind of service dispenser for Costa. So Costa Coffee is known for its coffee cafes. And for the experience that you get when you go to the physical cafe and order, etc., you can order the various varieties of coffee and snacks and all of those things. So now how do we create that same cafe experience through a self-service machine? So that was really the problem statement that they got. And in order for them to do that, they had to, and when you have something like this, which is out in the open, a machine which is out in the open, you have to be able to cater to people with different abilities, different heights, etc. So a person in a wheelchair, a child, an adult, all should be able to come to this machine and get what they want. So that was the first part, to be able to design this product to cater to different types of users. Then you have to also, make it sustain things like vandalism and make it vandalism proof to some extent because it's out in the open. And then going beyond that, so those are all parts of the basic design, but going beyond that, can it ever replicate a physical barista experience? This whole noise of the coffee brewing, the aroma that you get when you go to a cafe, or this nice aroma of coffee all around you, etc. The ability to customize your order based on your preferences. So all of that, how is that going to be possible using this machine? And this is where, Pininfarina went all out. They actually hired a Hollywood sound designer to create those right sounds in the machine as if coffee is brewing for you there. They also created these pellets which could create an aroma around the machine of coffee brewing that makes people, feel that whole experience. So it's really a multi-sensory experience that was created using this. This obviously enabled Costa Coffee to move away from this, I need to have a shop and I need to have a cafe and I need to be able to brew the coffee there, to be able to actually give this to organizations to use it in their own premises and airports and things like that. So very different business models that got enabled through this. So we've talked about physical products. We talked about, things like the iPhone, etc., and things that are digital products that combine digital into these physical products. We talked about service design, which is basically embedding all of this, process and organization, ecosystem around the digital or the physical product. And then we talked about the blending the physical and digital, which is what the Costa Coffee example is all about. But where do you go next? How do you go beyond this whole product and, perhaps create an ecosystem? And this is where I think two of my favorite topics have started to come together, which is the design and sustainability. And I think design can play a big part in enabling sustainability. So I think the two of them go really very well hand in hand. So if you look at, again, this whole continuum of product, service, etc., let's look at, examples of where sustainability has kind of married design in this space. So the first example I'm going to be talking about is this Aeron chair. In fact, I have an Aeron chair that I'm sitting on right now. And this is designed by a company called Herman Miller, which is fairly well established. They're more than 100 years old as a furniture company. And in 1992, two of their designers, Bill Stumpf and Don Chadwick, were asked design a chair which was ergonomically comfortable to sit on, etc., as well as environmentally sensitive. And they came up with this design. So as you can see, it's a mesh design. It doesn't use regular fabric. It uses a lot less plastic, etc., than if you had a full, a flat sheet. There's a lot of material innovation that has gone into it. It's one of the most comfortable work chairs that you can find in the world. And it uses a combination of aluminum, steel, plastic, etc., but it doesn't really use foam, fabric, leather, maybe foam to a very small extent in case you want a cushioned seat, but it does not really recommend even a cushioned seat. It's 92% recyclable. It's made out of also recycled materials. So overall, I think they've been able to marry this design and sustainability very well in this one. If you go to the next, we talked about the whole service design, designing the processes, etc., around it. And this example is by the Dutch Railways. Those of you who have been to Netherlands or read about Netherlands, it's a country that likes using eco-friendly things, and especially bicycles. So people use bicycles a lot in that country. But if you're traveling, say, from one city to another by train, or if you're traveling by the metro within the city, and you want to be able to cycle at the end, it's quite difficult for you to carry your cycles in the train. How do you actually enable cycling for the last mile connectivity that you need once you get off the train? So the Dutch railway company itself introduced this concept called OV-Fiets. Fiets means bicycles, and this is really the public transport using bicycles. They're provided at a fairly low cost, and they're available at about 300 locations around the Netherlands. So they estimate that they save about 800,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually by the use of these bikes. So you can actually, order a bike for yourself. You can see the availability of the bikes while you're on the train. When you get off the train, you then get, you take the bike and then ride to your destination using this. So this is again a concept, something where they've combined the product with the service. Yeah. In fact, they've combined two products, the railway service as well as the bike service together here. The third one, which then talks about how you can get into the business model design, is an organization called PIRBI. And PIRBI is, again, set up by a European founder. This is a gentleman called Dan Wedderpool, I think is his name, Wedderpool. Dan Wedderpool is his name. So I think in 2009, he had his whole house was destroyed in a fire and he lost all his possessions. And he realized that a lot of people came forward to help him at that time, right from a place to stay to things to use, etc. Everyone pitched in, so all his neighbors and friends pitched in to help him. And he decided to take this concept, and in 2011, he created this platform called PIRBI. He and a few friends created this platform. And what this platform does is allows you to borrow things. So just like you had, he was able to do it from his neighbors and friends, this created a platform where a number of people could do it, not just from their friends, but also from people they don't know, from strangers, but who might be in the same location. And this, so the initial platform was just borrowing free. Now they also have a concept of renting, so you can pay a fee or charge a fee when you're lending somebody something on this platform. They've got about 250,000 users now. It's also expanded to other cities in Europe and the US. And in fact, when they went public, they raised 2 million euros from their users. So it is actually a platform that is owned by its users. It's a crowd-owned platform. And finally, I think everyone talks about electric cars and the fact that, obviously we need to use more electric cars for the sake of the environment. But one of the problems that I think everyone has is the range that electric cars provide. And if you look at, if you're traveling from point to point, and I've owned an electric car for a long time, if you're traveling from point to point, it's great. But if you don't know, how many stops you're going to make or, how far you have to travel in a city, you're a little apprehensive about taking an electric car. And usually they take a long time to charge. So now people have come up with this concept of fast charge stations. Now the fast charge stations still take some time, and then they're very expensive because you have to provide a very high voltage to enable a fast charge. And in order for that to happen, the investment that is required is very high. So it will take probably a few decades for that kind of fast charge infrastructure to be set up. So this company called Adaptive City Mobility has created this concept of reusable batteries or charged batteries waiting for you, and it's set up in Germany. But it's not just Germany. I mean, in India, we've got Indian Oil that has got this concept. Sun Mobility, which is the organization set up by the original manufacturer of the Reva car, Chetan Maini set up Sun Mobility. So Sun Mobility has actually started doing pilots in the NCR region with an electric auto rickshaw called Smart E. So this is a fleet of auto rickshaws that provide last mile connectivity from the metro to either offices or homes, etc., for people. And they have started this. They are also doing a pilot with Ashok Leyland, I think in Ahmedabad initially, where the bus fleets can use, reusable or pre-charged battery. So you drive up to one of these charging stations, you take out your battery and load the battery that's already charged and drive away. So that really helps this whole ecosystem. So the ecosystem that needs to be created is between the battery providers, the charging stations, the fleet operators, and probably the city that allows these things to be run as public transport for them. So this is now coming to this concept of smart cities and smart ecosystems that are being designed. And I think this is really where the biggest use and the most important use of design will come up, in this ability to tie these various aspects together and solve problems that have been plaguing us for a very, very long time. So I've talked a lot about all of these concepts. And before I come to the end of my presentation, I want to talk about one more aspect, which is understanding humans. What are the most frequently used apps on your phones today? I'm going to open up the chat to see what people are answering to that. Anyone? What's the most frequently used app on your phone? Or Kaushik or Roger, do you want to answer that? WhatsApp, yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, lots of people saying WhatsApp. Any others? If your kid were to use your phone, what would they be using? Facebook, okay. Games, okay. WhatsApp, LinkedIn, perfect. Okay, so social media and games. Payment apps, all right, but I'm sure you don't use payment apps as much as you would Facebook or WhatsApp, right? But yes, social media and games are the biggest things I think that all of us use. That's because all of us are social beings, right? We like to interact with other people. And the other thing is that we like to play games. I mean, most of, especially as children and even as adults, I think all of us like to play games. We like to get either competitive or even non-competitive games we like to play. Now, how does that get implemented into design? And I'll give you two examples. One where we did not understand that concept very well, and one where we understood that concept very well. So the first one is a picture shown here actually. So this is an NGO, this was many years before the current Swachh Bharat program, probably at least a decade or more ago. There was an NGO that was constructing toilets in rural places, and they did this in Punjab. And this is a problem I think that has been talked about, not just about India, but even other countries, where they built the toilets, and then a year later they would go back and look at it and find that the toilet is not being used. It's being used to store cattle, it's being used to store grains, it's being used for everything other than as a toilet. So this was especially actually in this particular village, they built it so that the women didn't have to go out into fields and could use these closed toilets. So when they started asking people as to why they were not going out, why they were not using the toilet, what they realized is that these women were in fairly, close patriarchal kind of, houses. And for them, they didn't have too much opportunity to go out of the house and meet other women and talk to them. this outing that they did into the field was one way that they could get to meet other women and talk to them. So it became a social outing to do that, which the toilet was not enabling them to do. So suddenly they realized that the problem that they were trying to solve is this, hygienic, and not having people go out into the fields for defecation, etc. Whereas from these women's minds, they felt that the social aspect of getting together with other women was far more important than using a closed toilet. So this part, that social aspect, and the human as a social being is something we really need to understand. The most successful apps are the ones that have understood that and allow or create an opportunity for us to interact with other humans. The second example I'm going to talk about, and we'll play a video very, very shortly on that, is this concept of games, right? All humans like to play, and especially as children, we like to play. Now, this was, an experiment that was done in order to prevent things like diarrhea, etc., from occurring. They wanted to make sure children wash their hands before every meal. And especially the midday meal, which is served in schools, they wanted to make sure that kids would do that. Now, one of the problems is that it takes time for kids to line up and queue up and wash their hands with soap. They're usually quite hungry by then, and they want to rush off and have their meals. And you see from the video why it was difficult for children to wash their hands initially, and what was the intervention that was done to make this design a lot more, adaptable and adoptable by the children. So as you can see, it's not enough to just to design an experience, design the services around it and the business model, etc. You have to create that spark that makes people love, what you're giving them. And that really comes from things like understanding, their need for social connections, their need for play, games, and all of those things. When I started in the IT industry, which was a long time ago, 30 years ago, it was all about green screens. And they talked about being customer friendly or user friendly. And in those days, it used to be giving people hints and drop downs and things like that. Those were considered the ultimate in user friendliness. We've come a long, long way since then. And now all of us are now so used to this kind of good design that this is what we expect, not just on our phones and on our laptops, but also in the external world. And the more we get used to this good design concepts, I think the more we can change the world around us also to apply those. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you for patiently listening to me. And I'm quite happy to answer questions that you might have now.
First of all, thank you very much. It was very, very informative and interesting as well. Just looking at the live bot video, I think the design also covered a little bit of teamwork, subconsciously, because it would work only if three children are there. I think that was one of the byproducts. A lot of questions coming in. So the first question that I have is, what are the right questions people should ask to cultivate the design thinking mindset, right? Because design is always about asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So how do you cultivate that mindset, or how do you get that started?
Sure. So there are, techniques, and I think if you look for design thinking courses, you will find a number of things available. The IDEO is the organization that is kind of, tagged as the organization that first brought this whole concept of design thinking out. And definitely, I think their techniques are really very good. So they provide you templates and things like that about how to go about this whole thing. So in fact, you don't even define your problem till you've understood the background and, actually observed. So it's not enough for you to ask questions. Of course, you have to learn the right questions to ask. So typically, you ask open-ended questions. You ask for examples. So if somebody says, I like to read, then you say, okay, what's the last book you read? Because you want to know how often they're reading and whether it's something that they're saying because you want to hear it, or whether they're actually doing it. So you start asking them those kind of things. And then you go and observe them in their area and see whether, what you're observing is actually matching what you got as answers as well. So those are all very important techniques for you to understand. There's an ideal example actually of designing a toothbrush for kids. Which is a classic example that is used. typically when you design something for kids, you make it smaller than the adult version, right? Small cup, small cup, big t-shirt, small t-shirt, right? So you would think that that is what you would need. You need to give kids a small toothbrush. And then when you start observing kids using a toothbrush, you realize they'll go jab at their faces, right? You have to give them something that is easy for them to hold. It's a small, thin toothbrush will very easily fall out of their fingers. So you need to give them something that has a good grip. You need to give them something soft that won't, even if they jab at their mouth, it's not going to hurt them. And you need to make this a little exciting for them to use, easy to grip, etc. Typically, when kids are brushing their teeth, it's when moms and dads are very, very hassled at the same time. They're all rushing off to work or whatever, and they're trying to get this kid to finish all this quickly. So dropping a toothbrush at that time is obviously not what a parent wants. So all of those things are what people understood, and then Oral-B was the one that actually hired IDEO to do that. So yes, questions are important. To understand the context is important, but very, very important is the observation.
Sure. So just jumping off on that, in terms of are there any standard tools or procedures that could help us qualify the pain points or help us capture these observations? This is a question from Krishnamurti, because while it's largely common sense, are there any standard practices or tools that people or teams could start using?
Yes. So there are things called journey maps that you create. So we talked about scenarios, right? So you create the journey map of the scenario. What does the customer go through in that, whatever process or life cycle is happening? And what are the touch points between the organization that's providing the product or service and the customer at that, or the consumer at each of those cases? And what are the pain points? That's how you start identifying the pain points. So, for instance, if we did this for a telephone, a mobile operator, so they said they wanted to figure out, what their customer satisfaction was, and they wanted to measure it at the contact center. And we said, hang on, the customer's touch points are many more than the contact center. And in overseas they give you a mobile phone as well as part of your plan, right? So the kind of phone that they're getting, the kind of plan that they're getting, the performance of the network, the accuracy of the bill that they're getting, all of those things are actually impacting their satisfaction. So it's not just this. So understanding all those aspects of the interaction with the organization and what is the journey that they're going through, and what are the pain points in each of those aspects. So that is how you start looking at that. And again, there are lots of standard tools. I mean, if you go through any kind of online design thinking course, it will give you all the tools and the templates that are required to help you do that.
Right. So again, you are observing the problems that the customer faces. You are mapping it through journey maps, like you said. And then Sovan Biswas asked the question about where do we draw the boundary between using all the design thinking and the empathy that involves versus the end user actual requirement with the digital or UX design that we have, right? At some point, how do we find that balance?
Sure. So yes. So there is this concept of yes. Is it first of all, is the solution that you're conceptualizing, is it feasible? Is it within the budget? So you have to set certain boundaries for yourself. So for instance, when you do during the ideation process, you're asked to think as if there are no constraints. Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we lost you for a second.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So I said, so when you're ideating, you're asked to think like there are no constraints. So if you were Superman, what would you do? Or if you had, no budget constraints, what would you do? And then you start. Sorry.
No, go for it, Padma. We are able to hear you loud and clear.
Sure. And then you start actually putting the constraints slowly, and then seeing which of these solutions would still apply with those constraints. So yes, you have to apply all of these things together. And yes, it's not that you would do the best the most freaky design, etc., or the most expensive. Sometimes the best design is also the most cost effective.
The best value that one does. So coming to cost effective or the best design, Janish Doshi asked the question: is Jugaad a right ingredient for good design, or is it the other way around? So is Jugaad a part of design thinking at all, or how does that qualify?
Yes. So Jugaad basically is all about using the minimal material and still being able to meet the requirement. So where Jugaad might probably fall over is in things like aesthetics, etc., which is what we've all come to expect now. So while it might, meet your immediate need, it might be the first step in a more evolved design. So typically, design also doesn't stop, right? You keep evolving a product over time. I mean, Google, for instance, keeps changing the browser that it gives you all the time, right? They're always adding new features. Maps keeps adding new features, for instance. So good design is not static; it is actually evolutionary. So good Jugaad could be the first step in a design, or you could end a Jugaad if you feel it actually meets all the requirements.
Right. Actually, very interestingly, somebody just pointed out that I have to explain what Jugaad is to some of the people who may not understand it. Google
Sure.
it. To those people who can't understand Jugaad, please do Google it, and we will try and organize a webinar just on that at some point of time.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly explain that. So Jugaad is typically what in India we do to meet a problem with the minimal of resources. So for instance, I remember going to a cousin's house and they had the gutter above, from the roof, the channel for the water that was broken. So because of that, the water was actually coming into their balcony. So he did a very simple thing. He took one of these PET bottles, the water bottles. He cut the back off and he put the spout and a little bit of the bottle into that water pipe, so that the water was then directed to flow out. So that is Jugaad. Jugaad is using very simple materials to solve a problem very quickly.
I haven't heard anybody explain it so well. Thank you. Again, and then it jumps off into so many different questions. I think this is a customary question that gets asked irrespective of topic, which is how does AI impact design thinking, right? I think
Sure.
this is one of those customary questions that we have to ask.
Correct. So it's not so much design thinking, but design itself. So rather, we talked about understanding characteristics and then driving behavior because you've understood characteristics, etc. Right? So those are all the things where analytics and AI would play a big role in. So once you start to understand your user or consumer or whatever it is, whoever is using your product, and you need to also be able to take data on a real-time basis and respond to them on a real-time basis so that you can provide that customization that's required. So, for instance, Maps knows when you're driving, right? Maps tells you, I mean, those days when we used to commute to work, nowadays we don't, but when we used to commute to work, it would start telling you around the time when you normally go back home at 6 or 7 or whatever it is, it would start telling you it's going to take you so long to go back home, right? So that's the use of analytics and some AI to determine what your patterns are and to start giving you solutions even before you want them or you need them.
Absolutely. And this is a question I think many people here would be interested to know the answer to is how do project managers and people who deliver projects inculcate design thinking into their projects, and how do they use it to improve their careers? Right? I think it's a lot of us are in the project management domain, so that is a question. So what would you say to that?
Yes,
This
I
is a
think it's
question
a very,
from.
very critical part of whatever we do now. So while we talk about design thinking in the context of products and services, it's also very useful to understand human behavior, to understand psychology, and then to help drive people's behavior in a team as well, right? It's also important for you to manage your stakeholders because once you understand, your stakeholders, personas, etc., then knowing which ones. So some of them like a lot of detail, some of them don't want detail; they want only the highlights. So deciding who needs what and customizing, reports for them, or designing a report that allows people to drill down and see the detail that they need or stay at the highest level. Those are all the things where I think design and design thinking would help us to actually be good project and program managers. Similarly, this whole concept of iterating and not trying to create a solution all at once at the very beginning, but understanding the whole ecosystem, the stakeholders, etc., and then coming up with a solution and then iterating that over time. Those are all concepts that can apply very, very well in the project management world as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the moment we talk about iterative solutions, all of our minds will jump to agile and disciplined agile, which are currently in vogue.
And they're very much, I think, the concepts that apply in the design world as well. All the agile principles apply there.
Absolutely. Excellent. So I'll lot of questions coming in. So is it okay, Padma, if people can connect with you on LinkedIn if they want to
Sure.
understand this a little better?
Yeah. So only one thing, do send a note on LinkedIn, because what happens is that if you connect and I don't have the context, I may not actually respond because I do get a lot of requests. So do
Absolutely.
send a message to say, what you're interested in and why you want to get it.
So I'll wrap it out with a couple of things. A lot of participation on a Saturday evening across not only India but across the world. A quick shout out to Thomas Valenta, who is part of a PMI fellow who has really appreciated the session.
Oh, and yes.
Yeah, and I'll take the last question from Tejas Sura, who's also part of the board of directors. You would like this question. In today's scenario, companies are adopting a reduction in cost approach. Many sustainable materials are expensive to include in design, and this would act as a deterrence in terms of adoption of sustainability. How can these be countered? Two topics that you love. How do you balance design and sustainability and cost?
Sure. In fact, some of the things, so there are lots of aspects to sustainability, right? There is, doing good, reducing your carbon footprint, using local or using local talent also as far as possible, etc. But when you come to things like, say, generating solar power, for instance, most of the panels that you get don't come from within the country; they usually imported in. So you start having these kind of questions as to whether you should use products that are not available locally or not made locally to solve another sustainability problem. So you're kind of breaking one sustainability rule to meet another. But I think those are the trade-offs you need to make. If it's not available today in your country, maybe you need to import, and maybe you need to start looking at what needs to be done to make it available in your country. Similarly, if the skills are not available in your country initially, maybe you need to get them, access them from outside. But over time, you need to start building them locally. So there are trade-offs, and yes, I remember when I first started working in this space, especially things like solar, etc. You say, should I use, what kind of panels should I use? I don't seem to have a local alternative. I need to get it from overseas. Some of those things do use chemicals. So what's the trade-off between using chemicals? Now, electric cars, for instance, in India, a lot of our power gets generated from coal. So the fact that you're using an electric car just means that you're not burning fuel in your car, but somebody else is burning fuel somewhere else to give you the electricity. So then you start looking at, okay, how do I make this sustainable further? Can I use a solar panel so that the electricity that is being generated is also being done in a clean fashion? So yes, once you get into this, it's a fascinating world, and you can get very deep into this subject. And it's not a very simple answer. That's the whole thing. I think there's a concept in design thinking of something called wicked problems. So wicked problems are things that are fairly complex to solve, and they don't have a very obvious or simple solution. And you have to balance a number of things to come up with the solution. So these are some of these problems are like that.
Thank you so much, Padma. I think I'm reminded of the quote, which is the best way to predict your future is to design it. I think if you want to have a sustainable future, we start working towards designing it. Once again, thank you so much for taking time out on a Saturday evening. So once again, looking forward to seeing you all at the Common Ground Symposium in November. And the $1 million question for today, the answer is 2000 MOJDKB, which is the PDU code for today's session. You can claim it. All information pertaining to Common Ground is available at the single URL, pmi.org.in/common ground. Past sessions, recording of past sessions. If you want to, if you have missed out some session and want to take a look at it again, all of it is available. Also, some easy to use documents that you can download, PDFs that you can download, are also available at commonground.in, pmi.org Common Ground. Do stay connected and engage with us, and have a good weekend and stay safe. See you all in 2021.